Welcome to PowerTable on Fabric Plan. In this video, we'll walk through the Crosstab Layout, which lets you pivot data from a standard table around a specific column, presenting it as a crosstab or Excel-style pivot table, provided certain prerequisites are met. Let's look at the prerequisites for setting up a crosstab layout. First, your table needs a primary key configured as an identity column. The column you pivot on must be either a single select input type or a date column. Columns that go into rows need to be non-nullable, that is, mandatory, and columns that go into values need to be nullable. For this video, we already have a time entries table in our database that meets all of these prerequisites. We'll set up a new PowerTable sheet and connect to it. You can see the table meets our prerequisites right in the configuration screen. A primary key set up as an identity column, along with a few mandatory columns that we'll later assign to the rows when setting up the crosstab. Now that our table is set up, we'll configure a few columns as single select to make data entry easier. Starting with employee IDs, we'll connect to an employee master data table to pull in employee names in place of their IDs. We'll configure lookups for the project and task columns the same way. Now that our columns are configured, let's set up the crosstab. The option to switch layouts is in the PowerTable tab of the toolbar. In the configuration, the first step is choosing the column to pivot on. All of our single select columns are available here, but we'll go with the date column. Choosing a date column opens up additional options. You can set the interval type to aggregate data at a higher level, such as by week or month, specify the start of the week, select a date range to display, choose a financial year, and enable multiple drill-down levels. Next, we'll choose the columns that go into the rows. As mentioned, only mandatory columns are available here. And finally, we'll select the values to display in the crosstab, in our case, the number of hours. We also have the option to display subtotals and grand totals. Once the configuration is complete, we hit Save, and PowerTable generates the crosstab based on our selections. A few things have changed. In the top left corner, there's a date range navigator, currently set to weeks. We can use the arrows on either end to move between weeks. In the top right corner, we have the option to change the display period of the crosstab. We can adjust this to display as many periods as we'd like on the crosstab. The crosstab layout really shines when entering values, especially for scenarios like time tracking. Take our time tracker here. In a regular table layout, entering a week's worth of time for a single task would mean inserting 5 separate rows, one for each date. With the crosstab, we only need a single row, and when the data writes back to the underlying table, it's stored as 5 separate rows, one per date. Let's try that out. Inserting a new row works just like a regular table. Click Insert Row, add a new row, and populate it with values. We can even copy and paste into the cells. Just like the regular layout, we can preview changes in the crosstab, and they're displayed in the same crosstab format. From here, we click Save to Database to write the data back to our underlying table. We can see the new row in our crosstab layout. If we switch back to the regular table layout, we'll see that 5 new rows have been added, just as we mentioned earlier. After the initial setup, we can always go back and adjust the crosstab configuration. To do this, we head to the PowerTable tab in the toolbar and click Manage Layouts under Layouts. As we saw during setup, the crosstab can display data at a higher interval than what's stored in the table. Our time tracker data is at the date level, but we can set the crosstab to display at a weekly, monthly, quarterly, or even yearly level. When the interval type is set higher than the base granularity, one option is especially important: Show Aggregated Values. With this enabled, clicking a cell for a given period opens a pop-up grid showing individual dates across that interval, so users can enter values for each date separately. If this option is not enabled, any value entered into a cell is stored against the first date of the period. For example, with a monthly interval, entering a value for January writes it to January 1st only, leaving all other dates blank. In our case, we'll enable this option. Since we've set the interval type to month with Show Aggregated Values enabled, clicking on a cell brings up a grid of all the days in that month. We can enter values individually for each date, and the crosstab displays the aggregated total for that month. And while the crosstab shows us the aggregated total, switching back to the table layout reveals the two individual rows we just entered. Now let's look at header record tables for the crosstab layout. A header record table is a database table that stores summary information connected to a set of detailed child records. In our time tracker example, this would be a timesheet table containing the list of all timesheets, where every entry in the time entry table is associated with a timesheet in the timesheet table. PowerTable lets you connect a header record table to the crosstab as long as certain prerequisites are met. The header record table needs a primary key set up as an identity column, a column in common with the crosstab table, and at least two date columns indicating the start and end date for each header record. To demonstrate this, we've set up a variation of the time entries table along with an additional timesheet table. Our time entries table now associates each entry with a timesheet instead of an employee. The timesheet table contains the list of all timesheets, the associated employee, start and end date columns for each timesheet, and a status column that we'll use later for approvals. We'll now set up a crosstab for the time entries table, this time with the header record enabled. We toggle the option on and select our timesheet table as the header record table. From here, we map the appropriate columns from the timesheet table to the required fields. During this step, we can also pick specific columns from the header table to display as filters within the crosstab layout. We'll continue configuring the remaining crosstab options just as we did earlier. With the header record table set up, the crosstab navigation changes slightly. In the top left corner, the date range navigator is replaced by a drop-down menu. Each value in the drop-down represents a row in the header record table, denoted by its start and end dates. We also have the additional filters we defined during configuration, employee names and timesheet names displayed on the side. In the top right corner, the display range selector is replaced by a button to create a new header record. Clicking it opens a side panel with a form, in our case, letting us create a new timesheet to log additional time entries under. Hitting Submit immediately creates a new header record in the timesheet table and switches the crosstab to display the newly created timesheet, so we can start entering time entries right away. When working with header tables and a crosstab, we can also set up an approval workflow, so every header record goes through an approval process. There are a couple of prerequisites that need to be met. First, the sheet should not already have the standard PowerTable sheet approval workflow configured. The approval workflow here is set up within the Crosstab Layout configuration. Secondly, the timesheet table needs a column to hold the approval status at any given time. We'll update the crosstab setup for our time entries table to include approvals on the timesheet table. With the header record table already configured, the layout configuration window now includes an Approvals tab where we can set up the approval workflow. Approvals can be enabled with a simple toggle. Once enabled, we assign a column to hold each record's approval status and customize the status labels. 4 are required: draft, pending, approved, and rejected. There's also an option to allow editing of records after approval. Finally, we set up one or more approvers to handle requests as they're submitted. Now let's see approvals in action. We'll insert a new value into an existing row and observe how the approval workflow kicks in. You'll notice the save process has changed. Instead of saving directly to the database, we now submit the changes for approval. With the approval workflow configured, the approval status of each header record is displayed right within the Crosstab layout, showing whether records are rejected, approved, or pending. On the Approver's end, the Approvals button in the PowerTable tab of the toolbar shows a badge indicating the number of pending requests. Clicking the Approvals button takes us to the Approvals screen, where we can see all pending requests. From here, we can approve or reject each request, and the status updates accordingly in the header table. Note that this approval process is separate from the standard approval workflow available in PowerTable. Once we approve or reject a request, the status updates within the Crosstab layout for that header record as well. And if we navigate to the timesheet table, our header table, we can see the status column has been updated with the latest status. That wraps up the Crosstab layout in PowerTable on FabricPlan. From setting up a crosstab on a standard table to working with date intervals and aggregated values, connecting a header record table, and configuring an approval workflow for header records. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.